The Supreme Court's emergency ruling has sparked a new era of law enforcement in the United States, quietly reshaping how authority is exercised at every level of government. This decision did not emerge after months of public debate or extended courtroom drama. It arrived swiftly through the court's emergency process, and with it came a shift that is already altering how laws move from paper into real life. What appears to be a technical ruling is, in reality, a foundational change in how enforcement power flows across the country. At the center of this ruling is the question of who controls enforcement when laws are challenged. Congress may write statutes, but enforcement determines how those statutes affect people's lives. For years, enforcement has often been paused or reshaped by lower courts issuing broad nationwide orders. In many cases, a single judge could halt a federal policy everywhere, even if the lawsuit involved only a small group of plaintiffs. Over time, this practice became normalized, despite ongoing constitutional concerns. The Supreme Court's ruling directly addresses that drift. The majority concluded that courts were moving beyond their intended role. Judges are tasked with resolving specific disputes between parties, not supervising national policy. When courts issue orders that extend far beyond the case before them, the majority argued, they cross from judging into governing. That distinction matters because judges are unelected and insulated from public accountability. The dissenting justices saw the issue from another angle. They warned that limiting judicial reach could allow unlawful government actions to remain in effect while cases slowly work their way through the legal system. From their perspective, nationwide court orders have often served as essential safeguards, especially when vulnerable groups lack the resources to bring multiple lawsuits. This disagreement reflects a deeper philosophical divide about how rights are best protected. The emergency nature of the ruling adds to its significance. Emergency decisions are reserved for situations where the court believes waiting would cause serious or irreversible harm. By acting quickly, the justices signaled that the existing enforcement framework posed a structural problem. This was not merely about one policy or one administration, it was about the long-term balance of power within the federal system. Almost immediately, the effects began to ripple outward. Federal agencies started reassessing enforcement programs that had been blocked nationwide. Policies that were previously frozen may now move forward in many regions. State governments began reevaluating their own strategies, both for enforcing state laws and for challenging federal actions. Legal teams across the country were forced to rethink approaches that relied heavily on sweeping judicial relief. For businesses, the ruling introduces a new level of complexity. Uniform nationwide pauses once provided predictability. Now, compliance may depend more heavily on geography. A regulation enforced in one state could still be blocked in another. Companies operating across multiple jurisdictions must pay closer attention to regional legal developments, increasing both costs and uncertainty. For ordinary Americans, the impact may not be immediately obvious, but it is real. Laws affecting employment, healthcare, education, immigration, or voting may now be enforced differently depending on where a person lives. Two individuals, subject to the same federal statute, could experience different outcomes based solely on location. Supporters of the ruling describe this as a return to federalism. Critics argue it undermines the idea of equal treatment under the law. The majority opinion responds to those concerns by emphasizing constitutional structure. In their view, uneven enforcement is not a flaw of the system, but a consequence of limiting power to its proper channels. If laws are unclear or harmful, the solution is clearer legislation or political change, not expanding judicial authority. By narrowing the reach of courts, the Supreme Court is placing greater responsibility on Congress and the executive branch. This ruling also changes incentives throughout the system. Federal agencies may act with more confidence, knowing that one adverse ruling is less likely to shut down an entire program nationwide. States may be more willing to test enforcement boundaries. Advocacy groups may need to pursue multiple cases instead of relying on a single national lawsuit. Power has not vanished. It has shifted. Lower courts now face a period of adjustment. Judges must tailor remedies more narrowly and remain aware that broad orders may invite swift Supreme Court review. Some courts will adapt cautiously. Others may probe the limits of the new framework. Conflicting rulings are likely increasing pressure on appellate courts and setting the stage for future Supreme Court intervention. Politically, the decision reshapes accountability. When courts step back, elections matter more. Policy outcomes become more directly tied to who controls Congress and the presidency. That principle was central to the majority's reasoning. They argue that democratic processes, not judicial shortcuts, are the primary means of resolving national disputes. Critics remain unconvinced. They point to historical moments when courts played a crucial role in protecting rights that legislatures were unwilling to defend. They worry that limiting judicial power could leave some groups exposed to harmful policies. Whether those fears materialize depends on how responsibly elected officials use the authority now returned to them. What is undeniable is that this emergency ruling marks a turning point. The The tools that once allowed rapid, nationwide judicial intervention are no longer guaranteed. Enforcement decisions may take longer, vary more widely, and generate greater political pressure. This new era of law enforcement is not defined by a single outcome, but by a shift in who decides. The Supreme Court has reasserted constitutional boundaries and signaled that the balance of power is being recalibrated. How this transformation ultimately shapes daily life will depend on the choices made by lawmakers, agencies, courts, and voters in the months and years ahead. Now that the Supreme Court's emergency ruling has sparked a new era of law enforcement, the focus shifts from what the court decided to how that decision reshapes everyday reality. Supreme Court rulings do not operate in isolation. They alter incentives, redistribute authority, and change how institutions behave. This ruling is already doing all three, and its effects will become more visible over time. The most immediate consequence is uneven enforcement across the country. Without automatic nationwide judicial blocks, federal laws and regulations may now operate differently depending on location. A policy limited in one district may proceed freely in another. Supporters argue this restores constitutional balance by keeping courts within their proper role. Critics warn that it creates confusion and inconsistency in how federal law is experienced by the public. Federal agencies are among the first to adapt. Previously, a single unfavorable ruling could shut down an enforcement program nationwide. That risk often encouraged delay and caution. Now, agencies may act more decisively, knowing that legal challenges may apply only to specific plaintiffs. This could accelerate enforcement activity, but it also increases uncertainty for individuals and businesses trying to understand their obligations. State governments are also recalibrating their strategies. Attorneys general, who once relied on nationwide injunctions to block federal actions, must now pursue narrower litigation. At the same time, states defending controversial laws may find greater freedom to enforce them beyond limited jurisdictions. This shifts power back toward federalism, where states play a more active role in testing national authority. Advocacy organizations face a significant adjustment. Litigation has long been the fastest path to nationwide change. That path is now slower and more expensive. Instead of one case producing national impact, multiple lawsuits across multiple courts may be required. Well-funded organizations will adapt more easily, while smaller groups may struggle to keep pace. For ordinary Americans, the effects will unfold gradually but meaningfully. Workplace protections, environmental rules, healthcare access, immigration enforcement, and voting procedures may vary more sharply by region. Rights that once felt uniform may now feel local. The majority views this as democratic accountability returning to elections. The dissent worries it leaves vulnerable populations exposed. The ruling also sends a message to Congress. For years, lawmakers have relied on agencies and courts to resolve difficult policy questions. By narrowing judicial power, the Supreme Court is signaling that clearer legislation is necessary. If Congress wants uniform outcomes, it must write laws that leave less room for dispute and delay. Lower courts now operate under heightened scrutiny. Judges must tailor remedies carefully and avoid broad orders that exceed their authority. Some will comply cautiously, others may test the boundaries. Conflicting rulings are likely, increasing legal uncertainty and sending more cases back to higher courts. Politically, responsibility becomes harder to avoid. When courts step back, voters must look more directly to elected officials for outcomes. Policy successes and failures are less easily attributed to judges. This shift aligns with the majority's belief that democratic processes are the primary safeguard of rights. Ultimately, this emergency ruling does not eliminate conflict. It redistributes it. Power moves away from individual judges and back into a system that depends on legislation, enforcement, and elections. That process is slower and messier, but closer to constitutional design. As this new enforcement era develops, one reality is clear. The rules governing how laws take effect in America have changed. The consequences will not appear overnight, but they will shape authority, accountability, and daily life for years to come. This shift will define how power is exercised nationwide and remembered long after current debates fade away.